Before attempting to replace the factory rear end with a Currie Crate Rearend, you must get your Chevy in the air and the wheels and tires off. Now is a good time to clean and degrease the factory components for a cleaner installation. The first step is to disconnect the brake line from the factory rear end. Due to the design of the factory bracket, you will need to separate both hard lines from the distribution block before the line can be loosened and removed. Because we are upgrading to disc brakes, we will unbolt and remove the e-brake cables from the linkage. We will be removing the cables with the rear end and replacing them with new cables. If you will be using drum brakes on the new rear end, these factory cables may be retained. The e-brake cables also need to be unhooked from the frame on each side. Unbolt the drive shaft at the yoke and remove it. Unbolt the shocks on both sides and remove them from the housing. Due to the short shock length and the lowered stance of our Chevy, we had to remove the shocks before removing the tires. If you can remove the tires at the beginning, it will give you more clearance to work. Unbolt the bottom spring plates on each side. Be prepared for the rear end to tip forward once all the bolts are removed. Once the spring pads are removed, jack the rear end up and separate it from the leaf springs. Unbolt both rear leaf springs at the rear shackle and let them hang down out of the way. Now that everything is disconnected, you should be able to remove the rear end from under the Chevy. Here is the new Currie Crate Rearend 9-inch. Each crate rear end comes standard with a heavy-duty housing, axles, and third member with optional gear ratio and carriers. Various posit traction units and lockers are also available as options. You will need to have the axle bearings pressed onto the axles. If you need to have this done by a shop, you should locate that shop before you start your project. Use RTV silicone on both sides of the third member gasket to ensure a good seal. Place the third member into the housing and use the supplied nuts and washers to bolt it up. Torque the nuts to 35 foot-pounds. The axles come unfinished so you can paint them to your desired color. It's best to paint them before installing them. While the axles are drying, put the T-bolts into the housing and slide the brake backing plates into place. Once the paint is dry, add a little grease to the axle splines and apply a light layer of silicone on the outside of the axle seal. Slide both axles into place, making sure the seal goes all the way into the housing. Use the supplied stover nuts to bolt the retainer plate and axle into the housing. Rotate the axle in 90-degree increments to get access to each bolt. Torque the axle nuts to 35 foot-pounds. Once the axles are tight, place the brake rotors onto the axle flanges. Slide the new calipers into place and bolt them onto the backing plates. Use Loctite on the bolt threads. If you've upgraded to disc brakes, we offer a caliper flex hose kit. The tabs from the caliper flex hoses will need to be welded onto your housing for proper installation. We also chose to replace all of the brake lines with a Currie replacement brake line kit. This kit comes with the hard lines for the housing and a new rubber hose that connects the housing to the frame. You will need to bend the lines to fit the housing, cut the lines to the proper length, and make at least 2 double flares. In this application, it was easiest to purchase a replacement Tri-5 Chevy brake hose that was a direct fit. Attach it at the housing before putting the rear end back under your Chevy. At this point, the crate rear end is ready to go in. Make sure it lines up with the leaf spring alignment pins and that it is also high enough so that your leaf springs can be bolted back on. We chose to replace the shackles and bushings while we had it apart. Make sure you lube polyurethane bushings with grease or they will squeak. Slide the shackles into place and tighten them on both sides. Make sure the rear end is resting on the alignment pins and place the new U-bolts over the housing. The new crate rear end has larger axle tubes for higher strength and durability. You may need to open up your spring plate holes to accommodate the larger spread of the U-bolts. Thread on all of the U-bolt nuts and tighten them evenly. Reattach the shocks on both sides and tighten. Attach the brake hose at the frame and tighten the hose using a line wrench. The Currie e-brake cable kit comes with everything you need for a proper installation. Start by attaching the outer sleeves to the backing plates on each side. Attach the fitting to the frame on each side. Mark the cable sleeves where they will need to be cut. Make sure the sleeves are clear of your exhaust and other components. Use a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters to cut the sleeve. Slide the cable sleeve into the fitting on the frame. Tighten the fittings at the caliper and frame. Slide the e-brake cable through the brackets. Once the brackets are on, slide the cables through both sleeves starting from the caliper side. The bracket slides over the e-brake arm on the backing plate. Screw the new cable attachment block onto the factory e-brake arm. Slide both cables through until they are snug and tighten them. Make sure to add oil to your rear end. We recommend 9+ gear oil for all of our rear ends. Also, if you order a Positraction, you may need an additive as well. Put the drive shaft back into place and evenly snug the U-bolts onto the yoke. Torque the U-bolts to 18 to 20 foot-pounds. Before reattaching the wheels, make sure to bleed the brakes. If you don't know how to do this, have a professional bleed them for you. Reattach the wheels and tires and torque them to the manufacturer's specifications. Keep in mind that some aftermarket brakes do not fit many 14-inch wheels and some 15-inch wheels. Be sure to ask your salesman before ordering. At this point, your Chevy should be ready to drive. Make sure to follow the proper break-in procedure outlined in the instructions. For more information and to figure out which options will work best for your car, go to currieenterprises.com.